So you're about to hear from a local panel of experts, their reaction to this morning's presentations. First we have Suzanne Schultz. Suzanne is the Director of Planning for the City of Grand Rapids. She's a smart growth advocate who believes in quality urban centers. Over the past 13 years, she has helped shift policies and land development practices in the City of Grand Rapids to create a vibrant and sustainable community. Our next panelist is Peter Allen. He has 40 years experience as an Ann Arbor area real estate developer, consultant, and U of M educator. He has pioneered and developed mixed-use properties in the Ann Arbor area. He is an adjunct faculty member of the University of Michigan Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning and the Stephen M. Ross School of Business. Next panelist is Joanne Feitz. Ms. Feitz is a certified aging in place specialist through the National Home Building Association and chairperson of the Universal Design Committee of the Grand Rapids Home Builders Association. She works with employers, companies, and commercial projects to evaluate work sites and projects for accessibility and universal design. And our last panelist is Dr. Jonathan Levine. He is a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of Michigan. His research focuses on the relationships between transportation systems and land use in metropolitan regions, factors that drive the development of such systems, and accessibility-based evaluation of transportation and land use. Let's welcome our panelists.
But how they interact in the community and that freedom that they have to live in a community when they don't have a car is significant, and it's something that everyone should have. The statistic was mentioned earlier that 1 in 5 adults, over the age of 65 can't drive. If you bring in people with disabilities, children, those others who, you may have lost your driver's license for some reason, you can't drive, it comes down to almost 1 in 3. So you're creating communities for only those who can drive and only can benefit and have social interaction if you have a driver's license. So how do you create a community where everyone has equal access to opportunities, that they can get to church, to school, to work, especially employment? How do you get there if you can't afford a car? And if the average cost of ownership of a car is $7,000 to $8,000 a year, and you're barely able to make the house payment, these are options that a lot of people don't have. And in Michigan, during the economic downturn, you saw thousands of households, if you look at the census data, go from 2-car households to 1-car households, and from 1-car households to 0. So how did these people get to work, to school, to these opportunities, and how do they have access to healthy food, and all the things that you expect if you're living the American dream? And that has been really the work in Grand Rapids that we have been trying to do, is making sure that we offer a variety of different housing types at a variety of different price points with balanced transportation, that we have a complete streets policy, so that we're ensuring that we're developing our land uses compatible with where the transit routes are, that when you build a development project, you're putting a sidewalk in front of the project along the public street, that the front door is meeting the sidewalk with another pathway that's very clear, even if it's separated by a parking lot. And in most cases, you're building the building right up at the sidewalk so that it's very clear where the door entry is, and you don't feel like you have to drive there to be able to have the privilege of entering through the front door. And we've worked extensively with disability advocates at Kent County, and I'm thrilled to share the panel today because they really have brought to the table a very important piece of the discussion. The concept of when we were working with our zoning ordinance, we had a pretty engaging public process for as much as you can with writing a zoning ordinance, not a real sexy topic. But what matters to the community? How should we regulate form of a community so that it facilitates creating an opportunity for everyone to get everywhere they want to go? And what we did is we had these discussions, and disability advocates came to the table and said, it's great if you can have shorter block lengths, because for the sight impaired, they know where the next block is coming. They can predict where those crossings will be. If you have the building up at the sidewalk and the doorway is recessed, because you don't want to be hit by the door opening in the sidewalk, it's recessed, you know where the door openings are. You don't have to walk through the Walmart parking lot when the bus drops you off to hopefully find the front door. So how do these things all work together? If you're a pedestrian, just in general, how do you feel safe in an environment? And we use crime prevention through environmental design, which there's 5 or 6 principles. And basically they say, if you feel like you can be seen, you're watched, and you can see others, there's certain things like just requiring windows on the front of a building. 60% facade transparency is our requirement. That any new commercial development has to have windows on the front. And what 7-Eleven found when they had a whole slew of robberies for their stores, they found that if you felt like you were being watched, it was a natural crime deterrent. So how do you physically design your spaces to naturally take care of things, that people are feeling comfortable where they're at, waiting for the bus, walking in their community, interacting with one another, that they feel safe, and that it offers those opportunities. Is how do you use your transit, how you're building your land use that's supportive of transit services. We've been very conscientious in working with the Rapid to make sure the land use matches the transit routes. Our zoning aligns with that to encourage transit-oriented development. We have been pushing it really hard from a public policy standpoint to make sure that these things are integrated and that the design of those buildings work really well so that pedestrians feel comfortable.
We're at the moment of a new economic cycle. The last 5 years has been a disaster for housing. We're all hearing articles about how it's coming back, but it's clearly coming back, morphing into a whole new set of demands. The compact, walkable, downtown, transit-oriented, mixed use, as Ann Arbor has shown off in the last couple of years, is where the future is. The next market that's going to happen is going to be the crowd we're talking about, is going to be that active senior, that 50, 60, 75, where they're clearly independent. And there's no question in my marketing mind that it wants to be in the heart of downtown as much as possible. It wants to be not ghettoized in a building that's all seniors. I loved your comments about dorks or whatever they're called. And the idea that it is walkable to Carytown, walkable to the YMCA, walkable to the library, walkable to campus and the cultural, walkable to the Michigan Theater, that heavy emphasis on walkable urbanity, to me, is one of the keys. And I think that's the most important thing you can build on. And I would think that a clear majority of the marketplace of that empty nester crowd wants to be downtown, wants to be walkable, wants to avoid their car, wants to be intergenerational, and they probably want, for the most part, to be rental, not for sale. We've been building $300 a square foot for sale condos downtown through this recession, but it's only been 15, 20 units. I think there's a demand in most of our downtowns that have quality of life for hundreds, if not thousands, of rental units for the vast demographic continuum. So let me talk about, if you're not downtown, what do you do? What do you do with all those killer cul-de-sacs? What do you do with all the single-family monstrosities we built over the last couple of economic cycles? And I think Ann Arbor tried to do this 8 years ago. Where's Wendy Ramson? Wendy, was 8 years ago we tried to do ADU, Granny Flats? 7 years ago? 10 years ago. I think we're going to revisit that. To take in a neighborhood, particularly around Carytown Farmers Market, or that's walkable to downtown, and rezone that so it allows for accessory dwelling units and allows for the granny flat idea, allows for somebody to move into that house, pay some rent, have some eyes and ears on the senior, perhaps do the joint cooking, get a little rent off that property, stabilize its value. I think we're going to revisit that and prove that it makes all kinds of sense as a way to begin to repopulate and densify and make more compact those residential neighborhoods.
If you look around your neighborhoods, look around your cities, and it was pointed out with many of these slides that many of our homes are older and they're not accessible at all. And I don't mean just for people using wheelchairs. I'll give one example. I live on a cul-de-sac, off a cul-de-sac. In the suburb, there's no sidewalks. It's 5 miles to any public transportation at all. And in 1 week, we had 4 people on our street that were using crutches. One was an 85-year-old who fell and broke his hip. My son was a 16-year-old with a pole vault injury. There was a 13-year-old down the street who had a soccer injury, and another guy down the street who was having elective knee surgery. So all 4 people were on crutches. We were the only house on the street that was a ranch. We were the only house on the street that only had 1 step, because when we built it, you had to get a variance if you didn't want to have that 1 step into your house. So we had a schedule. All these people came to our houses for their showers, They had a schedule of who went, everybody could get in and out with just the one step. You can imagine one of the persons had to sleep on the couch because his bedroom was upstairs. And our development's only 30 years old. It's not, it wasn't built in the 20s or anything. So there's so many houses that are built, I'll never be out of a job, that are just not accessible. And not just for older Americans, but for everybody. I wrote an article about universal design that's family friendly, and it's so true. My coworker built a house that was 0-step, universal design. Her kids were 6 and 3, and her 6-year-old's convinced that this house was built for him. But as it works out now with the 0-step, her father-in-law, who is a baby boomer and temporarily using a wheelchair, her grandmother, who is 85, as well as her children, can all use this house and all market to anyone. That's another thing when you're talking about building universal design and, does it cost too much? Or it really doesn't, because 19% of people in America have a disability. Now, it's not always a physical disability, but why would you build something that you can't market to another 19% of the market? You've just lost 19% of the market share. So that's one of the things we do when we talk to builders. We have a lot of collaborations with the Home Building Association. They put out a brochure called Universal Design, Building a Home for a Lifetime. Has nothing about disability in it. It's talking about what kind of equipment do you have in your house? You have a treadmill. What kind of things do you do in your lifestyle? Do you host family parties? So it's collaborating with other agencies, other community groups, all for the same purpose, all for the same value. Right. Well, in our city and county, we have community development block grants. And some of those funds, we've partnered with the city and with the county, are used to do home modifications for accessibility. Now, it is income related. It is for the lower of income, those that can't afford it. But we do build wheelchair ramps. We do put in grab bars. We do some of the simple things, handrails. But that allows the person to stay in their community and talk about sustainable, because they're staying in their neighborhood, they're staying in their house, they have that social network that they've always had. Economically, they're still getting their hair cut down the street. They're still maybe buying the newspaper. They're still paying utilities to the local utility company. And environmentally, we're not tearing down and, all these materials, we're just adding to, and that house, again, is more marketable.
So we have two pieces of rhetoric that we use. We talk about aging in place and we talk about age-friendly communities. They're not the same thing. So as Rodney so aptly pointed out, when the vast majority of elderly people say, I want to stay in my house, they don't really see any alternative. In other words, the alternative is often either being cut off from one's community or a loss of independence. They're not living in age-friendly communities, and we can do our best, and we have organizations who are doing heroic work to try and retrofit homes to make the homes accessible. But I think I'm on this panel, at least in part, for transportation. I want to point out how difficult it is to provide transportation other than automotive transportation in the low-density suburban and especially exurban areas where so many of us live. So the rhetoric of aging in place, if it means staying in our home, means commanding lots and lots of subsidy for transportation purposes. Now, I'm a big government liberal. I have no problem with subsidy. The problem is that what we're doing is we're effectively reallocating transportation resources from places where transportation needs can be served relatively inexpensively to places where transportation needs are very, very expensive to serve. So another approach is to say, listen, we can provide a very high level of transportation services, but we can provide them in certain areas. We can provide them in amenable areas, areas that are transit friendly, areas that are paratransit friendly. In lower density areas, yes, there's a certain amount that we can provide, but you can't get the same level of service. AARP has the dual goals of creating the aging-friendly community and providing services where those aging-friendly communities don't exist. I want to point out that those two goals exist in some tension with each other. Because, first of all, for the subsidy issue, the cross-subsidy issue that I mentioned, and secondly, ultimately this becomes a political question. And the creation of age-friendly communities is a matter of building coalitions in support of overcoming the obstacles. So to the extent that our efforts are devoted into the notion of aging in place, even if you're not an age-friendly community, I think we're diluting both the subsidies that are needed in order to give people a dignified lifestyle and the potential political coalitions. Even so, if I am an aging individual living in a community whose density supports walking, that's also a community or a neighborhood whose density can support transit, whose density can support paratransit. So we mustn't equate, we have to understand that the reason for a walkable community is not exclusively in order to walk. Another reason for walkable community is to make a range of services available at affordable prices. Obstacles. We have a number of obstacles. I'd like to focus on a few of them. Our land use regulations, we've touched on that. Regulations against accessory dwelling units. I'll tell you a little story. This was from the dispute here in Ann Arbor 10 years ago. I went down to City Hall or Planning Commission to talk in favor of the proposed change to allow accessible dwelling units. A neighbor of mine argued against it, and later he approached me and he said, "This is America here, and we believe in the market system." And I said, "Precisely, sir. Nobody's going to force you to build an accessory dwelling unit. We're talking about getting government off your back so that you can do that." I don't think he was convinced, and so we have political obstacles to overcome, and it's really a matter of political coalition building, very much at the municipal level. We require parking. We link parking with our dwelling units, and require it by law. We can do a whole lot less of that. We can engage in a whole lot more flexibility. So if I'm somebody who needs less parking or no parking at all, I'm not forced to pay for a parking spot with my unit. We can talk. We have in fact lots and lots of paratransit going on from numerous social service agencies. But I have to be qualified for a particular agency or a particular church, and if I'm not qualified for their transit. There may be transit actually going from where I want to go to where I need to go, but if I'm not qualified and it's not coordinated, it might as well not be there. So coordination of the multiple transit operators and paratransit operators is going to be a part of the solution.
One of the arguments for accessory dwelling units and granny flats is it enormously increases the supply of small units. And I think if you have an enormous increase in supply, it's going to put downward pressure on price, and it's going to make it more affordable. I think one of the ways that Ann Arbor will continue to be affordable is with the mass transit systems. For instance, if we get the commuter going from Ann Arbor to Detroit and points east, I think one of the best land plays and building plays in the area will be those people living in Depot Town and Ypsilanti who can jump on a commuter and get to downtown Ann Arbor and the medical center for a $1.50 ticket. So it's spreading out the base and the access to new supply. It's providing rental, it's providing smaller, and it's providing subsidies where, whether it's an artist or a low income, needs it as one of the density bonuses.
I just want to say I'm one of those who lives in place who has a granny flat. And we were one of the people that were very, what shall I say, publicly noticed when we were doing this thing in Ann Arbor 10 years ago. It's wonderful, but if I die and I am going to be 90 this summer. If I die, my kids cannot rent out my apartment because of the zoning. So I would ask all city councils to think of that. That should be changed.
Doing this. When we did our zoning ordinance, we actually had the community push back and say we want ADUs. Because it does improve affordability, and it was kind of, the discussion was under what conditions. So is there sufficient parking, is the lot size, can it handle it? And we do it through a special land use process, so the neighbors still can have a say, but it's not one meeting with the planning commission, it's not entirely arduous, but we're also very clear from an enforcement standpoint that you're approving a dwelling unit. Doesn't matter who lives there, it's a dwelling unit. So just to be really clear, your grandma can live there today, you can have a student there tomorrow, and we're really clear with the neighborhood that that's what it is. And I think, because I sit on the Fair Housing Board, I'm an ardent advocate of fair housing laws, and it's just, if it's a dwelling unit, it's a dwelling unit. And there should be no debate about who's living there, but there are impacts that you can mitigate for through proper regulations.
And I want a 30-second answer from each panelist, because we've heard a lot about opportunities and solutions. Some seem to be real long-term. I would like you to give your advice as to what the people in this room can do immediately when they leave to begin the process of addressing some of the challenges and opportunities. And we'll start right here with Suzanne and move down the road.
Pay attention to what's on the Planning Commission and City Commission or City Council agendas in your community, because there are huge opportunities when they're doing development approvals and reviews that if they don't have the existing laws in place to start to make your voice heard, but then also advocate for policy and ordinance changes. Some of these things are not that difficult, requiring a sidewalk or requiring building placement, which can be more debatable, but you can actually change the physical form of your community by being involved in master plan, zoning ordinances discussions, and those policy decisions that they're making at a local level.
Make sure that you take your community, you agree on the master plan of what it wants to become, and create a form-based code around it so that things are development ready. The private sector is sitting on literally trillions of dollars looking for a place to do something. And the solution to all the things we've talked about is not the public sector, it's the private sector. So leverage the private sector by creating a very clear black and white plan of what you want to happen, what kind of housing, where, what kind of form, density, and so on.
Can I just add to that for 2 seconds? And that's exactly, we have a form-based code. Developers aren't mind readers, so you want to require what you want and make it as easy as possible. I mean, the expedited reviews were mentioned. We don't even do that. It's administrative review. If you build what we want, you come in. I've approved multi-million-dollar projects administratively the Planning Commission never saw because you're building what we want. And we had an affordable housing project. They're like, well, but it's affordable housing. Nope, it's fine. It's good. You're good to go. So we approved it. So you want to make sure your regulations allow what you want, and then you advance that for the private development community, so it's super easy.
When the approval process.
All right, Joanne.
I'm just going to paraphrase our executive director, and this is related to housing, transportation, and this is his paraphrase. Build it for the least among us, and it'll work for all of us.
Mobilize at the municipal level. I think most of the comments suggested that where the action is in the municipality. We have a lot of retrograde regulations at the municipality. We have a lot of enforcement of an imagined lifestyle that exists for fewer and fewer of us. Seniors, it's well known that seniors are an enormous political force at the national level. I don't know that they're necessarily seen as such an enormous political force at the municipal level, possibly because they're not mobilized and they don't understand that this is about you and about your needs.
Let's give a big hand to our panelists. Thank you.